Alright, so today we're going to be soldering up a Teensy. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take some header pins and I'm going to go ahead and place them in either side of the board, and then I'm going to place it in a solderless breadboard. And what this does is it helps keep all the pins parallel to each other, so that way it's easy to pull in and out of sockets and boards later on. So the next thing I'm going to need to do is go ahead and grab my soldering iron, and I'm going to do something called wetting the tip. And this is where you just put a little bit of solder on it, just so you have something liquid on it. And what this does is it helps with the heat transfer between the soldering iron and whatever you're trying to heat up. So I get a little solder on it, and then I'm going to go ahead and place it against the pin and pad. And this first pin, I'm going to make a little bit too much solder on it, just to give us something to compare against with the other pins. So this next pin, I'm going to go a little light on, so again, wet the tip and hold it against the joint and then slowly feed in solder. So this one isn't going to have quite enough solder on it, and I think I'll do something similar for the next pin, but somewhere halfway in between a good solder joint and light. So heat up the joint, feed in the solder, and then this next pin, hopefully I'll get just right. So same process, conduction, feed in solder, and let's take a look at what we have. Alright, give me a second to focus. Not quite there, so a little more focus. Alright, so for this first solder pad, what you can see is it kind of balls up on the pin. The next one, it looks alright from this angle, but if we go ahead and take a look at it from the top, what we can see is we're not quite covering the pad all the way. You can see the same thing for B1, and then B2 we have good coverage all the way around. So let's go ahead and finish up this side, trying to get it just like that last pin that we did. So one of the things you want to really make sure you're doing when you're soldering these joints is making sure you heat up both the pin and the pad all the way before you start feeding in the solder. And what this does is it allows the solder to wick in to the joint. So if both are hot, the solder will melt and then form to all the little nooks and crannies of both components. Whereas if the component is cold when you go to solder it, what's going to happen is that wet solder from the soldering iron, when it first makes contact with the cold element, it's going to freeze, and when it's hard, it's not going to be able to move into all those little nooks and crannies. So another thing to note is I've done quite a few of pins in a row, so pretty soon it's probably going to get hard to solder. So that looks like what's happening now, because there's been a lot of oxide buildup on the tip of the pin, or the soldering iron. So what I just need to do is clean off the soldering iron and then re-wet it, and after I do that, it should be pretty straightforward to solder that next pin. So just remember, heat up the joint, feed in the solder, keep your tip clean, and then wet it every once in a while. Alright, I'll finish this up, but it's going to be pretty boring to watch, so I'll see you in lab.